In a small-town diner, a black woman named Ava Jackson faces open humiliation when a white police officer bullies her in front of stunned patrons. She remains calm, masking the storm brewing beneath. Her quiet strength hints that something much bigger is about to unfold. Full chapter content. We don't serve people like you after dark. The words slice through the buzzing warmth of Joe's diner like a jagged knife, silencing the clinking of plates and murmured conversations. Heads turned, forks froze halfway to their mouths. Eyes, wide and uncertain, shifted between the man in the blue uniform and the woman sitting alone at the corner booth. Ava Jackson set down her coffee cup slowly, carefully. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting an eerie pulse over the checkered linoleum floors and faded booths. Outside, the twilight bruised the sky into shades of violet and grey. Inside, the diner reeked of burnt grease, and something fouler now, the stench of fear and complicity. The man standing in front of her was Officer Clay Turner. Tall, wide-shouldered, buzz cut so short it looked like a freshly tilled field, and a jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked stone. His badge caught the light with a smug glint, as if it too smirked along with him. Ava looked up at him with an expression that was neither defiant nor submissive, just still, calm. A glassy kind of quiet that made Turner shift slightly on his boots, though he quickly masked it with a louder scoff. "You hear me, sweetheart?" Turner sneered, his voice rising enough to ensure the whole diner heard. "This is a family place. Good folks don't want no trouble." Behind the counter, old Joe pretended to polish a mug, his hands trembling. A young waitress froze near the coffee machine, her eyes darting from Ava to Turner, like she was watching a lit fuse sputter toward dynamite. Ava said nothing. Not yet. Her hand traced the rim of her coffee cup slowly, a circle again and again, as if drawing strength from its small, ordinary warmth. Turner leaned in closer, the leather of his belt creaking under his gut. "I'm being real nice, Mom. You best finish up and find someplace more suited to your kind." From a booth nearby, a man in a trucker hat muttered under his breath, "Damn shame. Used to be this place was clean." Ava's chest rose slowly, then fell. Her eyes stayed locked on Turner's, steady as iron. Turner snorted, amused by her silence. "Figures. Quiet now, but mouthy later, right? That's how it goes with you people." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air like poison. Ava moved. At last, her motions deliberate. She reached into her purse, not fast enough to alarm, but just enough to make Turner's hand twitch toward his holster, and pulled out a small, polished card. She placed it neatly on the table. Turner leaned closer to read it, then frowned, the smugness draining from his face, replaced by a twitch of confusion. It was a badge. Not hers, but real, official. Ava finally spoke, her voice low but resonant, cutting through the tension like a blade of pure steel. "You might want to look up who you're talking to." Her words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. Turner straightened, squaring his shoulders as if to recover dominance. "I don't care who you know, lady. This town's got rules." Ava's lips curved into a soft, almost pitying smile. She picked up the badge again, tucked it back into her purse with care, and stood up. At her full height, she wasn't intimidating, at least not physically, but something in the way she moved made Turner step back half an inch, almost imperceptibly. "I know," she said, "and you're about to find out who makes them now." She dropped a 20 on the table, grabbed her coat, and turned for the door. Turner barked after her, "Don't think you can just walk away." She paused just before pushing open the door, the cold wind already reaching in to snake around her ankles. Without turning back, she said quietly, "Chief Jackson will see you real soon." And with that, she walked into the night, leaving a stunned, silent diner and a pale-faced Officer Turner behind her. Outside, across the street, an unmarked black SUV waited, engine idling. Inside it, a man watched the diner through tinted windows. His jaw tightened as he saw the officer's bloated arrogance on full display. Chief Daniel Jackson, Ava's husband, and as of tomorrow morning, the new chief of police of this broken little town. The old oak trees bent and moaned against the cold wind as Ava pulled into the driveway of their modest brick home. The porch light cast a golden halo over the front steps, welcoming, warm, but tonight it felt like the calm before a storm. She turned off the ignition and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Through the windshield, she could see Daniel framed in the front window, his silhouette tall and still, watching her. Inside, the house smelled of leather, old wood, and the lingering trace of cinnamon from that morning's coffee. It was a house built on patience, on promises made and kept through years of struggle. It was not a house that tolerated fear. Ava shrugged off her coat, hung it neatly by the door, and found Daniel waiting in the living room, arms crossed, his face carved into hard lines. "You all right?" His voice was low, thick with the effort it took to keep his anger contained. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile meant for battlefields, not living rooms. "I'm fine." He made a scene. Daniel's jaw ticked. "Which one?" "Turner." The name landed with a heavy thud between them. Daniel's eyes darkened, and he sank into the leather armchair with a heavy sigh. "He humiliated you?" Daniel asked. Ava nodded once, folding herself onto the sofa across from him, in front of everyone. Silence pressed between them, thick and heavy. Daniel finally spoke. "Tomorrow's going to be a reckoning." Ava tilted her head, studying him. "Not just tomorrow. This whole town needs to change. You know that." He nodded grimly. "But change starts with breaking the shield they've built around themselves, around people like him." Ava leaned forward, her voice dropping into a sharper tone. "You're going to have targets on your back, Daniel. You know that, right?" Daniel smiled without humor. "I've had targets on my back since the day I passed the sergeant's exam." Ava laughed softly, a brittle sound. "Fair enough." Across town, meanwhile, Turner sat in his squad car, parked behind the gas station, hands trembling around his cigarette. His radio crackled faintly, unnoticed. He stared at the name scrawled hastily across a napkin from the diner, Chief Daniel Jackson. He'd overheard a few murmured conversations over the past month about a new appointment. New blood, they said. Someone clean, someone dangerous, whispered among the good old boys. Turner thought it was just bureaucratic nonsense, some paper pusher from another county, some desk jockey. He hadn't realized, not until tonight, and now the pieces clicked together. In his mind, like a sinister puzzle, the badge the black woman had shown him, the quiet authority in her voice, the way she hadn't flinched even once. He stubbed out the cigarette against the steering wheel, cursing under his breath. "If she talks." "I'm finished." Back at home, Ava and Daniel sat in the soft light of the living room. "In planning, we can't move too fast," Ava said. "They'll rally against you." "I'm not here to make friends," Daniel replied. "I'm here to make this place livable for everyone, not just the ones who look like Turner." She reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers. "You're not alone." He squeezed her hand gently. "Neither are you." For a long moment they sat like that, two figures silhouetted against the warmth of the room, while outside the night howled, and the town, oblivious to its coming reckoning, slept on. Across town, Turner threw his cruiser into gear and sped. Off into the darkness, a man scrambling to protect a crumbling empire built on fear. The storm had already begun, and by the time they realized it, it would be far too late to run. The morning broke grey and cold, casting a washed-out pallor over the town of Millstone. Fog clung stubbornly to the cracked sidewalks, wrapping storefronts and sagging porches in a suffocating shroud. Inside the mayor's office, The blinds were drawn tight. Only a thin sliver of light cut across the long, dusty conference table, where 5 men sat hunched over steaming cups of black coffee. Mayor Hank Rutherford, a heavy-set man with a ruddy face and a gut that strained against his belt, leaned forward, voice low and urgent. "You're telling me," he hissed, "that we just made a black man chief of police? And no one caught it?" This city councilman across from him, Gerald Pritchard, fidgeted with the rim of his coffee cup. His record was spotless. Military background, degree in criminal justice, decorated service. There was nothing obvious. "Obvious," Rutherford snapped. "Millstone's been running a certain way for generations. Now we got an outsider at the top who's going to dig up every damn skeleton we ever buried." A third man, Sheriff Tom Waller, spoke up, his deep voice like gravel. "You better believe it, especially if Turner pissed off his wife." Rutherford slammed a meaty fist onto the table, making the coffee cups jump. "Then we shut it down before it starts." Pritchard's forehead gleamed with sweat. "How? He's already been sworn in. Any move against him now will look like bigots." The room fell into a tense, heavy silence. They knew they couldn't be seen pushing back openly. It had to be quiet, strategic. 1,000 paper cuts instead of a sword. "Pressure him," Waller growled. "Box him in. Starve him of resources. Smother him in bureaucracy. Make him look ineffective." Rutherford grunted. "If he can't get results, the good citizens of Millstone will be begging us to replace him." They all nodded grimly. Outside, the town went about its business as usual, farmers in pickup trucks, shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps. But beneath the surface, the first cracks had begun to widen. At Joe's diner, the doorbell jingled. As Ava walked in, the same door she had exited through in quiet fury just the night before, heads turned again, but this time it wasn't because of fear. It was because of curiosity, and something deeper, the beginning of respect. Ava wore a simple grey coat and a scarf knotted at her throat. Her steps were measured, steady. She carried herself like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Joe, behind the counter, looked up from his register and hesitated. Then, seeing her steady gaze, he nodded once, subtle but meaningful. Turner wasn't there. Neither were his usual hangers-on. The corner booth he had occupied the night before sat empty, the leather seat cracked and gleaming under the diner's harsh lights. Ava chose a table near the window this time. She ordered coffee again, black, no sugar. The waitress, a young blonde, with nervous hands, brought it to her without meeting her eyes. But when she placed the cup down, she whispered so low Ava almost didn't hear it. "Sorry about yesterday." Ava looked up, offering the girl a soft smile. "It's not your fault." The waitress nodded quickly, scurrying away like a frightened rabbit. Outside, through the smudged glass, Ava saw the mayor's car glide past, tires hissing against the wet pavement. His face was visible through the window, hard, closed off, furious. Ava sipped her coffee, her reflection merging with the grey world outside. Change wasn't going to be welcomed. It was going to have to be forced. Back in his squad car, Turner seethed. He knew he was on thin ice. Word had spread fast. Some of the old guard at the station had warned him to lay low. Others avoided him entirely, unwilling to catch the stink of failure. He watched the diner from 2 blocks away, heart pounding. There she was, sitting there like she owned the damn place. He ground his teeth, fighting the urge to storm inside and confront her, but he knew it would only dig his grave deeper. For the first time in his career, Turner felt something he didn't recognize. It wasn't just anger, it was fear, real, gnawing fear. And it was just the beginning. The town square buzzed with restless energy. Folding chairs lined the cracked pavement in neat rows, a makeshift stage erected at the base of the old courthouse steps. A crisp new banner stretched above the stage, proudly announcing, "Welcome Chief Daniel Jackson." But the crowd that gathered beneath it was anything but welcoming. Farmers in muddy boots leaned against pickup trucks, arms crossed. Housewives in Pastel sweaters whispered behind manicured hands. Shopkeepers stood stiffly at the back, faces like stone. A few black families dotted the crowd, their expressions guarded, cautious, hopeful, but wary. Ava stood near the middle, arms folded, her gaze locked on the stage. Daniel stepped up to the podium with the kind of calm that unsettles men like Rutherford and Turner far more than rage ever could. He wore his new uniform, a dark tailored jacket gleaming with polished buttons, and his presence commanded silence before he even spoke a word. The mayor, standing off to the side, forced a smile so brittle it looked painful. Daniel gripped the sides of the podium and surveyed the crowd for a long moment, letting the weight of his gaze settle over them. Then he spoke. "This town," he said, voice firm but steady, has survived storms, wars, and hardships. But the greatest threat we face isn't from outside, it's from within. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Daniel continued, each word deliberate, each syllable slicing through the false niceties like a surgeon's scalpel. When fear governs us, when prejudice dictates our actions, when the law serves only some instead of all, we dishonor every sacrifice ever made for Millstone. Turner's fists clenched where he stood at the back of the crowd, half shielded by a rusted lamppost. Daniel's voice rose slightly, filled with a quiet, resonant power. "My commitment is simple, equal justice, not just for some, for everyone. The days of silence are over. The days of accountability have begun." A stunned hush fell over the square. The mayor cleared his throat loudly, trying to lighten the mood. "Let's all give a warm welcome to Chief Jackson, folks." A few scattered claps broke out. Half-hearted, awkward, Daniel nodded once, acknowledging the tepid applause, then stepped away from the podium. Ava watched him descend the courthouse steps, pride burning behind her cool exterior. This was just the first pebble in the landslide. Later that afternoon, Turner sat in a darkened booth at Murphy's Bar with two other officers, Sergeant Dean Lively and Officer Rick Masters. Both men wore their bitterness like a second uniform. "You heard him," Turner said, voice low, leaning forward. "He's going to start digging, investigating." Dean snorted. "What's he going to find? A few rough arrests? Some bad paperwork?" Turner shook his head. "You don't get it. Guys like him, they don't stop at bad paperwork. They start looking into hiring practices, use of force records, missing evidence, all that stuff we swept under the rug." Rick Masters leaned back, running a hand through his greasy hair. "Then we make him stop." Dean glanced around the bar nervously. "How?" "Pressure," Turner said, eyes gleaming. "Small things at first. Leaks to the media, false complaints, undermine his credibility. Make it look like he's unstable. Make the town think he's dangerous." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous?" Turner grinned, an ugly, wolfish thing. "People fear what they don't understand. We just have to show them a reason to be afraid." The three men sat there in the dim light, plotting in low, feverish tones, while outside the town continued on, oblivious to the war brewing beneath its quiet streets. That evening, Daniel and Ava sat on their back porch, sipping coffee and watching the sun bleed into the horizon. "You know they're already planning something," Ava said. Daniel nodded. "Let them." She turned toward him, brow furrowed. "You're too calm," he smiled faintly. "Because they're predictable. They'll make mistakes. And when they do," she asked. He set his coffee down carefully, his gaze never leaving the dying light. "I'll be ready." Ava leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the anchor she needed amid the chaos to come. Millstone was a town built on shaky foundations, and the first tremors had already started. The first article appeared 2 days later. Buried in the back pages of the Millstone Gazette, an anonymous, concerned citizen accused the new chief of police of questionable conduct during his previous service in another county. It was vague, it was dirty, and it was designed perfectly to plant doubt. Daniel stared at the newspaper in his office, jaw tight, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly like a swarm of gnats. The article never cited specific events, just whispers. Just enough to make the small minds of Millstone wonder if their worst fears about a black chief were true. He picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and tossed it into the trash. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Daniel called. It was Ava carrying 2 coffees. She closed the door behind her, setting 1 cup on his desk. "They started," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Just like we knew they would." Ava studied him, her brow furrowed. "You need to respond." "Not yet," he said. "Let them dig their hole a little deeper." She smiled, though worry clouded her features. "You always did know how to play the long game." Outside, life in Millstone carried on, but the undercurrents had grown stronger, darker. At the grocery store, Ava noticed it immediately. The 2 long stares, the muttered comments she wasn't meant to hear. She got him in here. "Now, look. City. Folks don't know our ways. She's gonna ruin this town." Ava ignored it all, head high, hands steady. But when she reached for a carton of milk, an older woman accidentally bumped into her hard enough to knock it to the floor. The woman smirked. "Watch it, honey. Don't want any trouble." Ava bent down slowly, picked up the milk, and placed it neatly back in the cooler. Without looking at the woman, she said in a voice so calm it cut sharper than a scream, "You're the one who should be careful." The woman paled visibly and backed away without another word. A small victory, but Ava knew better than to think they would all come so easily. Meanwhile, in a dusty back room at Murphy's bar, Turner leaned over a battered table, spreading out papers, emails, photos. Rick Masters whistled low under his breath. "You really went digging, huh?" Turner smirked. "Public records, personnel files, anything to stir the pot." He tapped 1 document triumphantly. "Got a suspension letter. It's minor, just procedural, but twist it the right way, and the town'll think he's dirty." Dean frowned. "Won't that backfire if anyone actually checks?" Turner's grin widened. "Nobody around here reads past the headline." The plan was simple. Leak more dirt, force an investigation, pressure Daniel into resignation, or at least tie his hands so tightly he couldn't do a damn thing. They toasted over cheap beers, a brotherhood forged in fear, too stupid to realize. They were already playing a losing hand. That night, Ava and Daniel sat on their porch again, but this time the air between them was heavier, more charged. "They're not going to stop," Ava said. Daniel shook his head. "No, they're going to escalate. Can we outlast them?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked, and the depth of his resolve made her breath catch. "We're not here to outlast them," he said. "We're here to outlive them." Ava smiled, small and fierce. The stars above blinked down coldly, indifferent witnesses to the battle that was only just beginning. And somewhere across town, another whisper took root, another lie grew legs. But the foundation of Millstone was already trembling. And once it broke, there would be no going back. The attacks came faster now. Anonymous letters slipped under Daniel's office door. False complaints phoned into City Hall. Cowardly little stabs in the dark by men too frightened to fight in the light. Daniel logged each one with clinical precision, filing them away like ammunition for a future battle. He knew they thought they could wear him down, grind him into submission. They thought he would break, or better yet lash out, and prove every ugly stereotype they clung to. But Daniel didn't break. He watched. He listened. And he waited. Across town, Ava found herself approached in the strangest places, by the most unexpected people. At the grocery store, Mrs. Hernandez, who ran the flower shop on Main, slipped a small envelope into Ava's coat pocket as they passed in an aisle. Inside was a handwritten note. "We stand with you. Tell us how to help." At the library, Mr. Collins, the elderly black janitor who'd cleaned the town buildings for 30 years, nodded at her silently, tapping his heart once with 2 fingers before returning to his work. At the diner, where so much of this had started, a young waitress, blonde, blue-eyed, left an extra cookie on Ava's saucer with her coffee. Underneath it was a tiny slip of paper. "Some of us are tired too." It wasn't much, but it was the beginning. 1. Evening, Ava hosted a quiet meeting at their home. No official invites, no emails, no records, just word of mouth among people who could be trusted. They gathered in the living room, 15 in all. Old, young, black, white, Latino. A tapestry. Of faces Millstone liked to pretend didn't exist. Daniel stood at the front, his posture straight but his voice low, intimate. "You don't owe us anything," he began. "You don't have to stand with us." He paused, letting the silence settle heavy. "But if you believe this town deserves better, this is your fight too." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Hernandez spoke. "First, they're scared of you because you see them for what they are, and you make the rest of us see it too." An older black man named Reverend James nodded grimly. "They kept us divided for a long time. Fear was always their weapon. Maybe it's time we gave them something to be afraid of." Soft chuckles floated through the room. Ava watched, heart swelling. This wasn't about revenge, it was about resurrection. Millstone wasn't dead. It had just been sleeping, and now it was starting to wake up. Meanwhile, Turner sat in the back booth of Murphy's, nursing a whiskey he could barely afford. The walls of his world were closing in, faster than he realized. He saw it in the way the mayor's calls had slowed, heard it in the way other officers avoided his gaze, felt it in the gnawing fear that twisted his gut. He still had his small circle, Dean, Rick, a few others. But the tide was shifting, and Turner knew one thing for certain. Desperate men did desperate things. Late one night, after most of the town had gone to sleep, Turner and his crew met in the abandoned parking lot behind the old hardware store. The plan was simple and dirty. Anonymous tip-offs to state investigators about misconduct under Daniel's leadership. Sabotage his patrol routes. Discredit him so thoroughly that even his allies would abandon him. "We do this," Dean said nervously. "There's no going back." Turner sneered. "There never was." They shook on it, sealing their foolish pact under a sky heavy with storm clouds. They thought they were shaping the battlefield, but they didn't realize the battlefield had already moved. And they were the ones, stranded, exposed, and alone. The next morning, Ava woke early, stepping onto the porch with a steaming mug of coffee. The air was cool, crisp. The kind of morning that smelled like new beginnings. Down the street, a group of neighbors were gathering, small clusters of people chatting, smiling, nodding toward her house. Not all were friendly, of course. Some kept their distance, faces twisted with suspicion, but others, the ones who mattered, stood openly unafraid. Daniel joined her a few minutes later, his coffee in hand, his other hand slipping around her waist. "They're here," he said softly. "Yeah," she whispered. "There." Here it was still small, still fragile, but it was real, and it was growing, a silent army, gathering strength not through violence or hatred, but through stubborn, relentless hope. The storm was coming. But for the first time in a long time, Ava felt ready. Millstones. Old walls were crumbling, and somewhere deep inside the town's wounded heart, something new was being built, something that could not be silenced again. The first blow fell on a Monday morning. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a mass arrest. It was a simple, cold act of paperwork. Daniel Jackson issued a departmental audit. Every officer, every arrest report, every use of force incident over the past 5 years. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was hidden. The news. spread through the Millstone Police Department like wildfire soaked in gasoline. Some tried to act calm, pretending they had nothing to fear. Others sweated through their uniforms, their sins leaking out through nervous glances and stuttering excuses. Officer Clay Turner didn't even pretend. He stormed into the briefing room late, sunglasses still on, reeking of whiskey and bravado. "You serious with this witch hunt?" he barked, slamming his hand down on the table. Daniel didn't flinch. He stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes sharp as razors. "This is not a witch hunt," he said evenly. "This is accountability." Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with a wary sort of interest. Deep down, they all knew Millstone's department wasn't clean, but it had always been easy to look the other way, until now. Turner sneered. "You won't last 6 months." Daniel smiled coolly. "That's 6 months longer than your career if you keep talking." A few low chuckles rumbled through the room. Turner's face flushed an ugly shade of red. He slammed his chair back and stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. Daniel watched him go without a word. The war had moved from whispers to open defiance. Good. He was ready for it. Meanwhile, Ava had her own battles to fight. She walked into Harper's grocery and felt the shift. Immediately. Last month, half the town would have turned their backs or pretended not to see her. Today, there were nods, small, cautious smiles, people stepping aside to let her pass, not out of fear, but out of respect. Not everyone, of course. Near the meat counter, she spotted Judith Pritchard, the mayor's wife, staring daggers at her from behind a pyramid of canned beans. Ava ignored her. Instead, she pushed her cart slowly through the aisles, feeling the weight of invisible eyes, some watching with admiration, some with loathing, all watching. As she reached the checkout, the young cashier, a teenager with dyed purple hair and nervous hands, stopped scanning her groceries for a moment. "Ma'am," the girl whispered, voice trembling. "What you're doing, what your husband's doing, it matters." Ava smiled softly. "Thank you." The girl's cheeks flushed pink, but her eyes shone with something fierce. Hope it wasn't much, but it was real, and real things, Ava knew, could grow roots deeper than fear. Later that night, Daniel sat in his office, surrounded by mountains of paperwork. Ava brought him dinner, cold fried chicken and mashed potatoes, but he barely touched it. His mind was locked onto the files spread across his desk like a battlefield map. Use of force reports filled with missing pages. Body camera. Footage lost in evidence rooms. Complaints dismissed without investigation. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Millstone's illusion of decency. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It was worse than he thought, and yet, strangely, it only strengthened his resolve. The rot was deep, but it wasn't invincible. He just needed time, and allies, and patience. 3 things Turner and his ilk didn't possess. Speaking of Turner, he was busy that same night getting drunk enough to numb the gnawing terror, eating away at his insides. Murphy's bar was half empty, the regulars keeping their distance. Even here, Turner's stink was starting to stick. He leaned heavily against the counter, glassy-eyed, as Rick Masters tried to talk him down. "Man, you gotta chill," Rick muttered. "All this screaming, you're just painting a target on your back." Turner laughed bitterly. "I already got a target, might as well make it interesting." He drained another shot, slamming the glass down hard enough to crack it. Behind the bar, Murphy, the owner, watched warily. He didn't want trouble, but he smelled it coming like a twister on the plains, and he knew one thing for damn sure: whatever was brewing in Millstone, it was about to get real ugly. The next day, Ava visited the town library to drop off some books. On her way out, she found a small group of townsfolk gathered near the bulletin board. At first glance, it looked like any other town announcement. Lost. Dogs, bake sales, church events, but someone had tacked up a flyer that caught her eye. At the top, in bold black letters, "We are Millstone too." Below, it was a simple message: equal rights, equal justice, equal voice, stand together. And underneath that, a list of signatures, dozens of them, some names she recognized, some she didn't. It was quiet, unassuming, but it was there. Proof that Millstone's silent majority was waking up. Ava felt a lump rise in her throat. Not fear, not anger, hope. Real, stubborn, terrifying hope. She turned to leave, and almost bumped into Reverend James. He smiled warmly at her, tapping the flyer with 2 fingers. "Plant a seed," he said. "Watch what grows." Ava smiled back. They weren't alone anymore, not really, not ever again. At the station, Daniel posted a memo on the main bulletin board: mandatory training, bias awareness, de-escalation techniques, and community engagement, no exceptions. The groans were immediate. The muttering was louder. Turner, predictably, made a show of crumpling up his copy and tossing it into the trash. Daniel watched without comment, let them show themselves. It made identifying enemies much easier. What Turner didn't realize was that every tantrum, every outburst, every sullen act of rebellion was being documented, not for revenge, for justice, because the day was coming, and soon, when every rotten root would be dragged into the sun. And on that day, Daniel planned to have all the receipts neatly organized and ready. That night, Ava and Daniel sat on the porch again. The night air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and distant rain. Daniel leaned back in his chair, gazing up at the stars. "You think we're making a dent?" he asked quietly. Ava followed his gaze, her heart steady. "I think," she said, "we're starting a fire." He chuckled low. "Let's just hope it burns the right things down." She took his hand. "It will." Because the thing about fire was, it didn't just destroy, it also cleared the way for new life, and Millstone was long overdue for a rebirth. In the darkness, 2 figures sat side by side, steady against the coming storm. The shields of silence were breaking, and there would be no rebuilding them. Not this time. The first town hall meeting under Daniel's leadership was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. The old courthouse was packed beyond fire code. Bodies squeezed into pew-like benches, leaning against walls, crowding the doors. Some faces were familiar, the usual good old boys, the concerned mothers, the business owners. But there were new faces too, faces that had rarely been seen in these halls. Black families, Latino workers, young people with tired eyes and sharp questions. The air crackled with tension. Daniel stepped up to the podium, calm and sure as always. Ava sat near the front, her heart pounding a slow, steady beat. "Good. Evening," Daniel said, his voice resonating through the room. "This department belongs to all of you. It will serve all of you, and it will answer to all of you." A murmur ran through the crowd, some skeptical, some cautiously hopeful. The mayor sat stiffly to the side, his smile strained to the breaking. Point first on the agenda, public concerns. The line to the microphone formed immediately. The first few were predictable: a complaint about late response times, a complaint about rising crime, despite statistics showing otherwise. But then something shifted. A young black man named Tyrone Davis stepped up. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and jeans, his posture straight, but his eyes wary. "My little brother got stopped by police 3 times last month," Tyrone said into the mic. "Never got a ticket, never got a warning, just stopped." A ripple ran through the crowd. Tyrone continued. "He's 15, walks to school, comes home, that's it. Y'all treating walking while black like a crime now?" Gasps, murmurs. Some nodded. Some looked away, shamefaced. Daniel met Tyrone's gaze steadily. "That ends now," Daniel said simply. Tyrone nodded once, stepping back from the mic with something almost like relief. One after another, more voices followed. Stories, pain, wounds that had been hidden for far too long, now bleeding. Openly in front of a captive audience, Ava watched. Heart aching but proud. This was what real change looked like. Messy, painful, necessary. Meanwhile, across town, Turner watched the meeting on a battered laptop at Murphy's bar. He seethed. "They're turning this place into a damn circus," he spat, slamming his fist on the table. Rick Masters shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe you ought to let it go, Clay." Turner turned on him, eyes wild. "Let it go? You think they'll stop with me? They'll come for all of us next." Rick didn't answer, because deep down he knew Turner was right. The old ways, the easy ways, were. You're dying, and Turner. He didn't know how to live in the new world being born. He drained his beer and slammed it down hard enough to crack the glass. "No," he muttered. "If they want a fight, they'll get one." He stumbled out into the night, breath fogging in the cold air, rage burning hotter than the cheap whiskey in his veins. The next morning, Millstone woke up to chaos. Someone had spray-painted "traitor" in huge dripping letters across the police department's front entrance. Daniel stood before it silently, arms crossed. Ava arrived minutes later, heart sinking at the sight. Turner's handiwork. Probably, but no proof. Not yet. Daniel ordered it cleaned up immediately. No grand speeches, no public statements. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. But inside, a line had been crossed. An attack on the department was an attack on the town itself, and that meant the rules had changed. At Murphy's, Turner nursed a bruised hand and a bruised ego. He hadn't planned on painting the station himself, but the booze had been warm and the night cold, and the anger too big to contain. Now he waited, heart hammering, wondering if Daniel would come for him. If he did, well, Turner wasn't planning to go quietly. He had friends, friends with influence, friends who owed him favors, friends who would rather burn Millstone to the ground than see it change. Back at the station, Daniel held a closed-door meeting with his most trusted officers, those few he knew he could rely on. The mood was grim but determined. "They're trying to provoke us," Daniel said, "trying to make us react out of anger." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "We don't give them what they want." Heads nodded, a plan formed. Quiet, patient, relentless, they would continue rooting out the rot. And when the time came, they would present their evidence so cleanly, so thoroughly, that even the mayor wouldn't be able to sweep it under the rug. No leaks, no mistakes, just justice. That evening, Ava sat at her kitchen table, staring out into the gathering dusk. The town was changing. She could feel it in the air, in the way neighbors spoke a little more carefully, in the way old alliances crumbled, and new ones formed in whispers and glances. She sipped her tea, feeling the weight of the fight ahead settle onto her shoulders. They were in it now, all the way. No turning back, no retreat. And as she watched the last light bleed from the sky, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Millstone would never be the same again. Whether it survived the fire about to rip through it, that was another question entirely. The storm finally broke. It started with a press release. Daniel stood outside the police department, a line of reporters gathered in front of him, their cameras buzzing, notepads ready. The courthouse steps behind him stood empty, but their shadow loomed large, a reminder of the centuries of power and silence that had ruled Millstone. Not today. Daniel cleared his throat once, then read from the prepared statement. Following an internal investigation, the Millstone Police Department has placed officers Rick Masters and Dean Lively on administrative leave, pending further inquiry into allegations of misconduct, falsification of reports, and abuse of authority. The words echoed off the buildings. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reporters jostled each other, hands shooting up for questions. Daniel held up a hand, silencing them. "This department will no longer protect those who abuse their badge. We are committed to transparency and justice. That commitment begins today." Flashbulbs popped. Questions roared. Daniel turned and walked back into the station without answering. A single one. Inside, his staff, what was left of it, watched him with a mix of awe and fear. Some nodded subtly, others looked away. It didn't matter. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here for the truth. Turner watched it all unfold. On the tiny TV at Murphy's, he sat hunched over the bar. Fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. Rick and Dean, his last true allies, gone. Suspended, publicly humiliated. Turner downed a shot of cheap whiskey and slammed the glass onto the counter. "They're picking us off," he snarled. Murphy, the bartender, said nothing. He just wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate strokes, careful not to meet Turner's eyes. Even Murphy knew which way the wind was blowing, and he wasn't stupid enough to stand against it. Turner stumbled out of the bar into the harsh afternoon light, blinking like a mole emerging from its hole. The town had turned on him. He could feel it in every sidelong glance, every door that didn't open when he knocked, every job application that disappeared into a black hole. He had one card left to play, and he intended to play it hard. That evening, Ava closed up the small volunteer office she'd been helping run, an offshoot of the local community center. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out onto the quiet street. The air was cool, the sky painted in fading streaks of orange and purple. As she made her way toward her car, she heard footsteps behind her. Fast, heavy. She turned. Too late. A rough hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. Turner. His face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot, his breath reeking of whiskey and rage. "You think you're better than us?" he spat. "Think you can just stroll in here and tear down everything we built?" Ava didn't flinch. She met his gaze squarely, her heart hammering but her voice calm. "You built nothing but fear," she said. He shoved her backward roughly, not hard enough to throw her to the ground, but hard enough to make a point. "You and your husband, you're dead already. You just don't know it yet." Before she could react, headlights flooded the street. A black SUV screeched to a halt. The door flew open. Daniel. He was out of the car in a second, gun drawn but lowered, his body moving between Ava and Turner like a human shield. "Step back," Daniel said, voice low and lethal. Turner laughed, an ugly, broken sound, and staggered backward into the shadows. He disappeared into the night like a rat fleeing a burning ship. Daniel turned to Ava, his hands gentle but urgent, checking her for injuries. "I'm fine," she whispered, voice shaking only slightly, but they both knew the truth. This wasn't about public policy anymore. This wasn't about politics. It was personal. It was war. Later at home, Ava sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, sipping tea with shaking hands. Daniel paced in front of her, fury radiating off him like heat. "I should have arrested him," he muttered. "Should have hauled his drunk ass straight into a cell." "You couldn't," Ava said quietly. "Not yet. Not without witnesses." Daniel cursed under his breath. They both knew Turner would deny everything, and in a town still teetering between the old ways and the new, the word of a drunk ex-cop would still carry too much weight for comfort. But that was changing, every day, and they had to be smart, they had to be patient, even if it burned. Daniel finally sat down beside her, his head in his hands. "I won't let him touch you again," he said hoarsely. Ava reached out, placing a hand on his back. "I'm not made of glass," she whispered. He looked up, eyes shining with unshed rage and love and fear. "I know," he said, "but you're still the best thing in this whole damn town." She smiled through the tightness in her throat. They would endure, together, because Turner had made a fatal mistake tonight. He had revealed his fear, and fear, once exposed, was weakness. It was only a matter of time now. The next day, Daniel filed an official restraining order against Turner. It wouldn't stop him, not completely, but it would give them a legal weapon if he tried again. It would also send a message: "We're not afraid of you." Across Millstone, the message rippled. Neighbors whispered. Shopkeepers exchanged glances. Church congregations buzzed with rumor. The lines had been drawn in the sand, and everyone, whether they admitted it or not, was choosing a side. Some clung tighter to the old ways, fists clenched, teeth bared. Others stepped cautiously into the light, unsure but willing to hope. Millstone was dividing, breaking open like a rotted tree split by a lightning strike, and in the cracks, new things were growing, things stronger than fear, things more stubborn than hate, things that would not be uprooted again, not by Turner, not by the mayor, not by anyone. The town's reckoning was no longer coming, it was here, and it was just getting started. The morning after Turner's assault, the town of Millstone felt like it was holding its breath. Shops opened late. Students dragged their feet on the way to school. Church bells rang at odd hours, jangling nerves even further. Everyone knew something had shifted. They just didn't know yet what the final cost would be. At the police station, Daniel sat behind his desk, staring at the restraining order paperwork, already stamped and filed. It was a small move legally, but symbolically it was a cannon blast across the bow of the old order. He knew Turner wouldn't back down. Not now. Men like him didn't surrender gracefully. They imploded. The question was, how much damage would he cause before he burned out? That question answered itself around noon. A call came in from dispatch, shaky and panicked. Shots fired. Main Street, officer needs assistance. Possible armed suspect. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He was on his feet before the radio finished squawking, sprinting toward his cruiser. Ava. She was supposed to meet a few community volunteers on Main this afternoon, organizing a donation drive at the library. He gunned the engine, siren wailing as he tore through the streets. When he arrived, tires screaming against the pavement, he saw the chaos. Immediately, people scattering. Shop. Windows shattered. An overturned fruit stand spilling oranges across the sidewalk like blood drops, and in the center of it all, Turner, wild-eyed, drunk, waving a handgun in one hand, a bottle of whiskey in the other. Ava stood frozen against the wall of the library. Hands raised slowly, calm but wary. Daniel's heart seized in his chest. He slammed the car into park and bolted from the door, gun drawn. "Turner!" he barked. "Drop the weapon!" Turner laughed, a high, broken sound. "You think you won?" he screamed. "You think you changed anything?" The crowd that had gathered, store owners, mothers clutching children, teenagers peeking from alleyways, watched in horror. Daniel took a slow step forward. "Clay," he said, voice steady, "you need to put that gun down." "You don't give me orders," Turner shrieked, swinging the gun wildly. Daniel kept his voice low, calm, deliberate. "This isn't the way," he said. "You're better than this." Turner's face crumpled, rage and shame battling in his bloodshot eyes. "No," he said brokenly. "You think you're better. You think you're clean. You're nothing. You don't belong here." Daniel swallowed the fury that threatened to rise. "Not now. Not here." Another slow step forward. "You're not the enemy," Daniel said, "but you're making yourself one." For a heartbeat, it seemed like Turner might listen. His hand wavered. The gun drooped slightly. Then someone shouted from the crowd, some panicked, foolish voice, and Turner flinched. The gun snapped up again, and for one breathless moment time stopped. Daniel fired, one shot, clean, precise. A lifetime of training, compressed into a single heartbeat. The bullet struck Turner's shoulder, spinning him backward onto the pavement. The gun skittered across the sidewalk. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Daniel kept his weapon trained until officers swarmed in, cuffing Turner roughly and dragging him away, howling curses into the unfeeling air. Daniel lowered his gun slowly, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. He turned to Ava, rushing toward her. She was shaken, but unhurt. He crushed her into his chest, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. It didn't matter. She held on just as fiercely. The news spread faster than fire. By sundown, every home in Millstone knew what had happened. That Chief Jackson had taken down one of Millstone's own, that the old way had bled out onto the streets in broad daylight. and that nothing could ever be the same again. Some wept, some cheered, some vowed revenge, but the spell was broken. The shield of silence was shattered, and into the ruins 1,000 new voices poured. That evening, a special town meeting was called, emergency session. The old courthouse was packed again. Standing room only, Daniel stood before them. No prepared speech, no teleprompters, just a man stripped bare, speaking his truth. "I didn't come here to divide this town," he said. "I came here to heal it." Murmurs, shifting feet, folded arms. "But healing," Daniel continued, "requires facing what we've been too afraid to name." He met their gazes one by one. The racism, the fear, the hatred. A gasp rippled through the room. Never had those words been spoken aloud here, not from a podium, not with cameras rolling, not with witnesses, but Daniel didn't stop. "It ends here," he said, "with me, with all of us." Silence, and then, from the back, Reverend James rose to his feet. "I stand with him," he said, voice firm. Then Mrs. Hernandez. "I stand." Then Tyrone Davis and Mr. Collins and the purple-haired cashier from Harper's. One by one they stood, white, black, Latino, old, young, until more than half the room was on its feet, until the old mayor's face turned a sickly shade of gray, until even the skeptics realized the tide had turned. Millstone had turned. Maybe not fully, maybe not forever. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to hope. Later that night, Daniel and Ava sat on their porch once more. The stars burned cold and brilliant above them. Daniel leaned back, exhausted beyond words, but smiling faintly. Ava rested her head on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head. "No," he said. "We did." She smiled, eyes stinging with unshed tears. For the first time in months, maybe in years, she let herself believe it, that they could win, that justice could take root in the most unlikely soil, that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. And as the night stretched out around them, Ava knew they weren't done fighting, not by a long shot, but they weren't fighting alone anymore, and that, more than anything, made all the difference. The days following Turner's arrest were unlike anything Millstone had ever seen. Every newspaper, every local broadcast, every whisper in the diner and the grocery store carried the same name, Daniel Jackson. Some called him a hero, some called him a traitor, but no one ignored him anymore. For the first time in decades, the town's conversations weren't about crops or sales or church bake-offs. They were about justice, about power, about who Millstone really belonged to. The answer was no, longer simple, and it terrified the old guard. At City Hall, a closed-door emergency meeting seethed with anger and panic. Mayor Rutherford paced behind his desk, the veins in his forehead pulsing. "We need to shut this down," he hissed, "before the whole damn town slips through our fingers." Councilman Pritchard mopped sweat from his brow. "How? We tried everything. Leaks, smears, Turner." He trailed off, the name sour in his mouth. Turner's public collapse had done more damage to their cause than any outsider ever could. "We still control the budget," the mayor said grimly. "We can starve him, cut funding, strip resources, make it impossible for him to operate." "And if he calls us out on it?" Pritchard asked. Rutherford's eyes gleamed with malice. "Let him. We'll paint him as a martyr, overplaying his hand, make him look unstable, dangerous." They all nodded, desperate for anything that could slow the tide rising against them. It wouldn't work. Deep down, they knew it, but pride wouldn't let them surrender. Not yet. Across town, Daniel prepared for battle. He spent long hours reviewing department budgets, uncovering the quiet sabotage already underway, emergency overtime denied, equipment requests lost, hiring freezes, a slow bleed designed to cripple his authority without ever firing a shot. Ava found him late one night at the kitchen table, papers spread out like battle maps, a deep frown furrowing his brow. "They're trying to box you in," she said softly. He nodded without looking up. "And they're doing a damn good job of it." She pulled out a chair, sitting beside him. "You can't win by their rules," she said. He looked at her finally, exhaustion etched into his features. "Then, what do we do?" She smiled, a fierce, knowing smile. "We change the rules." The next morning, the plan took shape. It started with the community. If the old power structure wanted to starve the department, Daniel would turn to the people. He launched a volunteer program, community patrols, fundraising drives for better equipment, town halls where citizens could voice concerns directly. At first, the idea was met with skepticism. Millstone didn't like change, didn't trust it. But then Mr. Collins showed up with his mop and bucket, volunteering to clean the station himself, and Mrs. Hernandez organized a bake sale that raised enough money to buy new first aid kits for patrol cars. And Tyrone Davis, that same young man who had spoken at the town hall, organized a neighborhood watch that actually lowered petty crime rates by 15% in a month. One by one, the cracks in the old walls widened, and from those cracks, new roots pushed through, stronger, deeper, unstoppable. The mayor's office raged helplessly. They tried to ban the volunteer patrols. Public backlash was immediate and vicious. They tried to smear Daniel in the papers again. No one believed it anymore. They tried to pressure the state government to intervene. No one cared enough to bail out a crumbling little town's fragile pride. In desperation, they even tried to reach out to Daniel privately. An offer was made through back channels. Resign quietly. Save face. Take a cushy job somewhere else. Daniel laughed when he heard it. He'd come too far to run now. He sent back a single word in response. No. Turner, meanwhile, languished in a hospital bed, awaiting arraignment. His fall from grace was swift and brutal. No lawyer would touch him without demanding a retainer he couldn't afford. No friends visited him. Even Murphy barred him from the bar. He had become a living ghost, a warning to others that the old ways were not just dying. They were already dead. Ava's life changed too. She found herself approached more and more often by people she'd never spoken to before. Mothers who thanked her for standing tall. Teens who asked how they could help, elders who admitted, sometimes through gritted teeth, that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong. It wasn't universal. There were still slurs muttered, under breath, still glares from passing trucks. But the silence was gone. Millstone was noisy now, alive. Ava had never loved the sound of messy, stubborn progress so much. One evening, they held a celebration at the town square. It wasn't official, no permits, no speeches, just music, food, laughter. Daniel and Ava stood near the fountain, hands intertwined, watching as children danced around the cracked old stone like it was sacred. Mrs. Hernandez pressed a pastry into Daniel's hand, grinning. Tyrone. Davis slapped him on the back, laughing. The mayor watched from across the square, face twisted in bitterness, but he didn't interfere. He couldn't, not anymore. The town had moved on, with or without him. Later that night, lying in bed, Daniel turned to Ava. "You think this lasts?" he asked quietly. She considered it. "No." He blinked, surprised. "But," she continued, "it doesn't have to last forever to matter." He smiled faintly, understanding they had lit a fire. Maybe it would burn out, maybe not, but it had burned long enough to leave something behind. A memory, a marker, proof that change was possible, and sometimes that was enough. Outside, Millstone slept fitfully. It wasn't a perfect town, it never would be, but it was no longer silent, no longer blind, no longer chained to its past. Ashes littered the ground where old walls once stood, and from those ashes new roots pushed deeper into the stubborn soil. Roots that would not break easily, roots that would hold, no matter what storms came next. The sun rose slowly over Millstone, bleeding gold across the fields and rooftops like a blessing. It was the first morning in a long time that didn't feel heavy. The first morning that didn't feel like a battle. It was a new day, and this time it belonged to everyone. Daniel stood at the window of the police department, sipping his coffee, watching the town wake up. The new recruits would be arriving soon. People he had personally vetted. People chosen not for their bloodlines or last names, but for their integrity. Outside, construction crews were repairing the front of the station, patching over the vandalism Turner had left behind. A fresh coat of paint. A new beginning. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Ava standing in the doorway, coffee in hand, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You ready?" she asked. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think I'll ever be ready for paperwork." "This heavy," she laughed, the sound light and genuine. For a moment they simply stood there, two warriors enjoying the brief peace they had earned. Then the clock struck 9 and the day began. The swearing-in ceremony was small, informal by design. No TV cameras, no grand speeches. Just a gathering of those who had fought for this day and those willing to carry the torch forward. Daniel shook hands with each new officer, meeting their eyes, measuring their weight. He saw nervousness, hope, determination. Good. That's what Millstone needed now, not perfect heroes, just honest ones. When it was over, the crowd drifted into the sunshine, buzzing with cautious optimism. Ava found him leaning against the flagpole, watching the scene unfold. "You did good," she said softly. "We did good," he corrected. She bumped, her shoulder against his, and they stood together, savoring the moment. It wouldn't last. Nothing ever did. But it didn't have to. It just had to be enough. And today, it was. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Ava took a walk through town. It was something they hadn't done in months, not without fear shadowing their every step. Now, though, the town felt different. At Harper's grocery, the purple-haired cashier waved brightly. At Joe's diner, Joe himself tipped his hat as they passed, his face red but earnest. At the library, a group of teenagers had started a mural project on the side wall, bright colors swirling into images of unity, justice, and resilience. Millstone was still rough around the edges, still scarred, but it was alive in a way it hadn't been for a very long time. They stopped by the town square, sitting on the fountain's edge, watching children race past in a blur of laughter. Ava leaned back, face tilted toward the sun. "I used to think change had to come all at once," she said. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "And now," she smiled, "now I think it's like planting seeds. You don't always get to see the tree, but you plant it anyway." Daniel reached out, threading his fingers through hers. "I'm glad we planted ours here," he said. She squeezed his hand. "So am I." Of course, not everyone was happy. The mayor still sat bitterly in his office, plotting his next move. A few old faces still scowled openly when they passed. Change didn't erase the past, it just refused to be chained by it. And that was enough. Enough. For today. Enough for tomorrow, enough for whatever battles still lay ahead. As evening fell, a small vigil was held at the town square. Not a vigil of mourning, a vigil of promise. Candles flickered against the dusk, held aloft by hands of every shade. Reverend James led a prayer, simple, heartfelt, no mention of Turner, no gloating. No hate, just hope. And the stubborn, radical belief that Millstone could be better than it had been, that it already was. Ava and Daniel stood side by side, candles glowing in their hands, their faces bathed in soft, golden light. Around them, the town pulsed with life, imperfect, wounded, beautiful. Afterward, as the crowd drifted homeward, Daniel and Ava remained. They sat on the courthouse steps, gazing out over the emptying square. "So," Daniel said, voice low, "what now?" Ava smiled, tired but unbowed. "Now we build." He laughed softly. Haven't we been building all along? Sure, she said, but now we build on solid ground. They sat there for a long time, the night wrapping around them like a soft, worn blanket, dreaming, planning, rooting themselves deeper into the soil they had fought so hard to claim. Somewhere far across town, an old building crumbled under the weight of neglect. Somewhere else, a new door swung open on fresh hinges, small changes, tiny victories, invisible revolutions, the kind that mattered most. As midnight crept over Millstone, Daniel and Ava finally rose, walking home together through the quiet streets, past the repaired storefronts, past the new murals, past the old scars, into a future that wasn't promised, but was possible because possibility was stronger than hate. Hope was stronger than fear, and love, fierce, stubborn, unwavering love, was the strongest force of all. They had built something here, not a perfect world, not a finished world, but a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were the greatest victories of all.